it's Ashley at Bookish Realm, and I am back with another video. Today I am here with my July final wrap-up. It was an excellent reading month. I participated in 3 readathons, which were the Pop Culture Readathon, the F-a-thon, as well as Lost-a-thon, and I was able to get bingo for each one of those readathons, which is great. So I didn't black out any boards, but I was able to get bingo, so I consider that a good reading month. So what we'll do first is jump into the statistics, since everybody seems to love the stats. Don't know why, but everybody seems to love the stats. So we're going to do the stats first, and then we'll talk about what I read this month. So this month I read a total of 25 books and a page count of 6,510 pages. As far as the genres are concerned, I read 1 picture book, 5 graphic novels, comics, and manga, 2 romance/contemporary, 9 realistic fiction, 3 paranormal, and 5 science fiction fantasy. For the age breakdown, I read 1 children's, 6 middle grade, 8 YA, and 10 adult. For format, I read 4 physical, 7 ebooks, and 14 audiobooks. For source, these numbers may not add up because some of the books I did own, but I also listened to on audio, so the numbers are not going to equal 25. For own, I had 11. 8 were borrowed from the library, 2 were from Kindle Unlimited, 0 were from Marvel Unlimited, and 6 were from Libro FM. As far as the other data that I keep track of, 6 had LGBTQIA+ representation, 1 was translated, 22 were own voices and diverse, 3 were over 500 pages, 4 were rereads, and 14 were written by Black authors. So those numbers are looking really good. I'm happy with this month's statistics. Now, as you all know, I did a mid-month wrap-up, which I will link in the card symbol above, but I will go ahead and show you the books that I did read in the first half of July. Genesis Begins Again by Alicia D. Williams, The Right Swipe by Alicia Rye, issues 1, 2, and 3 of BB Free by Gabby Rivera, The Avant-Gardes Volume Number 2 by Carly Usden, A Silent Voice by Yoshitoki Oma, Manana Land by Pam Munoz Ryan, You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson, Red at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson, Out of My Mind by Sharon Draper, Amal Unbound by Aisha Saeed, Suki and the Mermaid by Robert D. Sensucci, illustrated by Brian Pickney, Bayou Magic by Jewel Parker Rhodes, The Voting Booth by Brandy Colbert, and Pride by Ibiza Boy. So if you want to know my thoughts on those books, I definitely would recommend checking out that first wrap up where I go into more detail about how I felt about each one of those things that I did end up reading. So let's go ahead and jump into what I read in the second half of July. I'm going to do this a little different. Usually what I end up doing is I go in the order in which I read the books, but I just want to go ahead and knock 3 of these out the way because I'm actually going to be posting a full-length review of this entire series on Friday, which everyone has been waiting to hear about. So those books include New Moon, Eclipse, and Breaking Dawn, all by Stephanie Meyer, which are part of the Twilight Saga. Of course, naturally, I did not enjoy any of these books. I gave them all a 1 star. I found so many different issues with these books, down to misogyny, a borderline and abusive relationship, the mistreatment and misrepresentation of natives in the book. I have been part of a series of live shows where we talk about these issues that lie within these books and how nostalgia is not necessarily a justification for not identifying the horribly wrong things that are found in these books. While I won't specifically go into detail now because I will be tearing these books apart on Friday, just know that I did not enjoy reading them. In my vlogs, you can see that I was just too through in reading these books. They were not enjoyable. I had a tough time, but I did commit to participating in the live shows, so I wanted to continue my read. Plus, it's important for me as a librarian 10 years later, looking now into my role, that I know why I would not recommend these books, and I can adequately justify why I would not recommend these books to parents or teens or whoever. So yes, they're trash. Don't enjoy them. If you want to know more of my thoughts right now, before we get to that video on Friday, I would definitely recommend checking out all of the live shows that I've been a part of. We've done 2 live shows. The first live show we talked about Twilight and New Moon, and the second live show we talked about Eclipse and Breaking Dawn, and we will be doing a third live show where we will be talking about Midnight Sun. I do encourage you to use any money that is going to be used to purchase Midnight Sun or put any money towards Stephenie Meyer at all, that you do take that money and donate it to the Quileute tribe. That is the tribe that is represented in Twilight, and actually donate it to them because they need to move to higher ground. So I will leave the links to that information down below. I will be donating myself. I encourage you all to donate instead of putting money in Stephenie Meyer's pockets, because I'm not going to be purchasing Midnight Sun. I found a way to read Midnight Sun, but I am not going to be putting my own money into it. But I do feel like it's important to donate to that tribe. Okay, so the next book that I want to talk about is Mother of the Sea by Zetta Elliott, which is a book that I talked about heavily in my Black Mermaid / Siren vlog, which I will link up in the description box. And this book is essentially about a girl who is being taken from her homeland onto a boat and being sold into slavery. And it is about her experience and meeting this spirit that guides her through these horrible experiences while she's on this ship and what happens as a result. I don't want to give away much more than that, but it is a very short novella. There is a lot of trigger warnings for violence on the page, rape. There are some really gruesome descriptions of what people went through when they were sold into slavery and what that transatlantic voyage was like. So I would like to preface anyone's experience in reading this book, just keep that in mind. But it is a very powerful book. It is a very important book. I know that it has some Yoruba religion and traditions incorporated into it, so I would definitely recommend checking it out. My only issue that I had with this one is that I wanted to see a little bit more character development, but of course with it being a novella, I wasn't really privy to getting more information than what I got. But I would have loved to see this as a full-length novel, and I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. The next book that I ended up completing was The Deep by River Solomon, and I think that everyone pretty much knows how I feel about this book at this point. I ended up giving this one 5 out of 5 stars. You can see my emotional reaction to this book if you have watched that Mermaid and Siren vlog. This just was a book for me that made me feel very, very seen, and made me feel like I was reading a book that really, really understood what it meant to be Black and to honor your history, but also understand the trauma that comes with loving and enjoying who you are and recognizing your history. I think that everyone pretty much knows what this book is about. It is about these new group of beings that are considered mermaids that are descendants from pregnant slaves. And I think that that is kind of the narrative that gets pushed along when describing this book, but this book is so much more. It tackles collective trauma, it tackles gender identity. I think there is some coded sensory processing disorder in here. I'm not sure. I always feel like I'm stretching it when I say that, but I think that it is apparent on page in this book. There is a lot of discussion about mental health. There's even the discussion about how we as Black people are not a monolith, and we all deal with our trauma in different ways. Some of us kind of collapse under that trauma and that constant braiding of having to recognize where you've come from and knowing that you can't separate yourself from your past because it is a part of your current identity, while others of us use that as a way to fuel our anger into activism and fighting back. So there was so much going on in this book, so much that I couldn't even take the time right now to explain how much I absolutely adored this book, how much I felt completely seen in this book, how much I annotated this book. I mean, just annotations after annotations after annotations. I fell in love with this. This is going to easily be a favorite book of 2020. This is easily going to be a favorite book of all time. I have never fell in love with a book the way that I fell in love with this book on a first try. It just was phenomenal. I will be hosting a live show about this book on my channel on Thursday night at 8:30. So if you're interested in checking it out, it should already be posted under lives, and that's 8:30 EST. And of course, if you didn't know, I gave the book 5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read in the second half of July was also for that same project. This is a middle grade book that tells the story of this folklore of the Jumbies, where Jumbies are everything that you think is bad that scare you. Tracy Baptiste is from Trinidad, and these are stories that were told to kids to scare them when they weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. And she incorporated a lot of that into this book. It is about a young girl by the name of Corinne, and she's living on this island that I believe is reminiscent of Trinidad. I think that the reviews that I have seen and the discussions that I've seen around this book, it seems that this island is reminiscent of Trinidad, and it's just her and her father. Her mother has passed away, and she loves being with her father. She grows oranges on the island, the best oranges on the island, and everything seems to be going pretty well until there is this strange woman one day that comes into the market, and her name is Severine. And Severine just has this strange aura about her, but her father Pierre is very much into Severine, like he trusts her. And of course, things go horribly wrong. And Corinne never believed the story about the Jumbies. She doesn't feel like it's anything that's real. But when Severine comes around, you can tell that something is different. Something is not right. I absolutely enjoyed this. I originally picked this up because I was looking for books that had representation of black mermaids, black sirens, and I knew that the second book in the series, which I'm going to talk about, did have some, not even some, it was built around representation of black mermaids. So I thought that, you know, of course I would need to read this one first, and I enjoyed this one. The only issue that I had is that I listened to this on audio, so there's a lot of transferring of narratives between characters. So you'll have one chapter from one character's perspective, and then it'll switch to another character's perspective in a different chapter, and that got kind of frustrating because sometimes I didn't know who was speaking, because in the chapters there are no headings of who is speaking. They're just regular chapter titles. So I found that to be awkward and kind of choppy. And then her father Pierre plays such a heavy role in this book, but I don't feel like he was developed enough as a character. I don't feel like we as readers knew enough about him to be so invested and concerned about him in the second half of the book. So I didn't feel the connection that I think I was supposed to feel for Pierre, especially when some things really truly started happening. But I love the father-daughter relationship that did exist between Corinne and Pierre. I fell in love with it instantaneously. I love the folklore behind it. I love the journey that Corinne makes. I really appreciated the friendship dynamic between Corinne and the other characters in this book that were children. She was not a perfect character, and her friends were quick to check her on her mistakes, and her friends were very quick to let her know, hey, you don't have to do this by yourself. You're so used to doing everything alone. Maybe you should trust your friends. That's why we're your friends. And I think I really appreciated that reading this even as an adult, because I'm like that. I'm very independent. I don't like to ask for help. I don't like to reach out to anybody and say, hey, I'm struggling, can you help me? And Corinne is very much like that as well. So she really resonated with me as a character in that sense. So I ended up giving this one 3.5 out of 5 stars. And of course, I enjoyed it enough to move on to the next book. And I'm going to talk about that one. So of course, the next one that I ended up reading was Rise of the Jumbies by Tracy Baptiste. And I absolutely loved this one because not only the mermaid representation, but I thought that this one just was a better developed book. You can see Tracy Baptiste's writing really grow. I did end up giving this one, I believe, 4 stars, and I did not give it a full 5 because there still was that narrative changing that happened. I listened to this one on audio as well, but there was that narrative changing and not really knowing what character was speaking and what perspective. So it was a little on the awkward side sometimes, but this takes place after the events of the first book, so I can't really say too much about it. But what I did love about this one is the historical contents that Tracy Baptiste included in it. Specifically, the characters do end up making a trip to Ghana. I won't say why, but they do end up making a trip to Ghana, and they specifically are visiting a castle that seems to be reminiscent of the Cape Coast Castle. If you don't know what the Cape Coast Castle is, I implore you to just Google it and take a moment to read exactly what it is, because it is very important to understand what it is, especially in context of this book. But I think that that was what she was trying to get across to her readers in terms of like historical representation, and it was great. I learned so much from reading this book. This was the final book that I read for the Mermaid / Siren project, and it was a great way to close it out. I left with so many more questions, but also having learned so much, and I liked Tracy Baptiste's version of so much information that I had already gathered from the other books, and I liked her take on it. And I think that's what I appreciated about reading all of these books that had any type of Black Mermaid or Siren representation, is that each author had their own take on what this goddess or these goddesses were and how they were important to certain religions and how they're still important and how they are closely associated with slaves that have made that voyage from the coast of Africa to the Caribbean and the United States. So like I said, I ended up giving this one a 4 out of 5 stars. Great middle grade series. If you have not checked out the Jumbies, definitely give them a try. I will be buying the 3rd book and reading it before the year's over because I believe it is a trilogy. I don't think she's writing anymore in this series. The next book that I read was Love Overboard, which is the 3rd book in the Luminous Cruise Ship Chronicles, which is a series that a whole group of Black indie romance authors wrote during COVID, and they all take place on the same ship, but each author wrote from the perspective of different characters. And it's really cool because you can tell that all of the authors communicated with each other very effectively, because as you make your way through the books, you see pockets of instances of characters from the previous books. And I think that this is a great way to sample the writing style of these indie Black romance authors. There were a couple that I had heard of and some that I have never heard of, so this has given me a way to explore and check out some new authors. The way that I actually found this was because I am a junkie for Nicole Falls, who was a Black indie romance author, and I was just looking for something else to read of hers, and I found that she had written a book in the series, and I was going to go read it, but she is like book number 8, so I was like, you know what, I'm going to start from the beginning and just work my way through. I read the first 2, I believe, in May, and I did not pick any more up in June. And in July, I was really itching for a Black indie romance, and I was like, let me just go ahead and pick up the 3rd book in the series. I can't tell you much about it because it is the 3rd book in the series, but what I can tell you about the series in general is that There are individuals that board this ship. This is a ship for singles, or a cruise for singles, and everybody goes there with different levels of expectations. Some people are there just to hook up, others are there because they're looking for long-term romance, and in every book we see both a male and a female come together some way, somehow. Each one of them probably has had some sort of breakup or a failed marriage or something along those lines of not having a good relationship prior to getting on this cruise ship. And of course they meet, they interact, they have some steamy hot scenes, and then we get an epilogue of what happened. So these are typically really short, not even more than 60 pages. I think this one was probably just a little over 60. This one focuses on Sean and Havana, and I think the only thing that I did not like about this one is I didn't feel like Sean and Havana had a lot of chemistry, but I do think that Havana is a very good character in the sense that she was like, I want a one-night stand, I don't really care, don't have feelings for you, I'm gonna do what I want to do. And it was nice seeing a black woman own her sexuality and be okay with just saying, I just basically want to sleep with you and that's it, and not be categorized as someone that has loose morals for wanting to do something like that. So I appreciated that unapologetic, I just want to have sex type of woman, and it was very much so in this book. But I did appreciate that. I did end up giving this one 3 stars, and I am looking forward to reading the next one in the series. So the last book that I read for this month was such a good book. 2020 has been a crap year, but we are getting some gems of books, and the book that I ended up reading was This Is My America by Kim Johnson. I talked about this one a lot on Twitter. I even reached out to Kim and was like, thank you for writing this book because it was really good. I think that a lot of times when we think about books, especially YA books that deal with the Black experience, the first ones that we go to are Dear Martin and The Hate You Give, which are both excellent books, but this one tackles the Black experience from a different perspective. It really heavily delves into the whole conversation about mass incarceration, which really reminded me heavily of Bryan Stevenson's Were Just Mercy. And you can kind of see remnants of the conversations that Bryan Stevenson has in that book that are laced within this book. This book is about a girl by the name of Tracy, and Tracy at the beginning of this novel we see is writing all of these letters to this organization by the name of Innocence X, which is a brief nod to the Equal Justice Initiative, which is an organization that fights mass incarceration, equal treatment, the end of racism and discrimination. They do so much. They do a lot. I'll leave a link to their organization down below. But she's writing these letters because her father is currently on death row, and he only has somewhere I think around like 250, 260 days left, and she's been writing them for 7 years, which is the amount of time that he had been incarcerated, and she's trying to get them to take a look at her case, or at his case, because of the fact that she believes that her father is innocent. There were people who had came forward and said that they would be her father's alibi, but the prosecution and the defense didn't want to hear anything about that. So while this book does look at mass incarceration, what I appreciated about it is that it looks at how mass incarceration affects the families that are left behind. So quite often what we always talk about when we have these discussions about mass incarceration is the individuals that are being incarcerated, and we don't always examine what happens to the families that they leave behind. And Kim Johnson does this perfectly. You can see how it has affected this entire family, how it has affected their reputation in their town. Tracy and her family are treated extremely different from everybody else because her father has been accused of killing 2 white people. So there is this ostracization that occurs because of the fact that her father has been incarcerated and the entire family has to live with that. What's interesting about this is that it takes kind of a mystery spin on it after we find out that her brother Jamal has been accused now of killing a white girl. So to her, it feels very cyclical. She feels like her brother is being set up in a situation where he is also innocent, but of course now she has to figure out what has truly happened in order to help save her brother. What I loved about this novel is that it talked about a lot of different subjects without feeling like it was trying to do too much in a short period of time. I always have an issue with novels that try to cover too many topics in too short an amount of pages, and it just doesn't come off well. But this one seems like it did it pretty well, because Kim Johnson also tackles different conversations about interracial dating and what interracial dating is like from the perspective of a black woman as opposed to a black man, and how they're two very different experiences. She talks about generational trauma, which was probably the part that hit me the hardest, especially hearing Jamal talk about generational trauma and how a lot of times black people can feel defeated because it feels like nothing is ever going to get better. She also talks about how white people face generational trauma, and I didn't really think about that. I didn't really consider that to be a thing until I read this book, and I learned from the experience of someone who grew up in a racist household how that affected her perspective of a lot of things, because even though as a child she didn't understand and she felt like it wasn't right not to like someone just because of the way that they look, she said that it didn't feel right, but because she had family members who were pushing her in that direction, she ends up developing this whole level of complicitness that ends up hurting people in the end. And that connection between their generational trauma and the complicitness was a very interesting conversation that I didn't even really think about, especially to those who have been exposed to racism as children and not really understanding why they're not supposed to like people and how that affects them into adulthood, which I think is a very complex and probably a very difficult conversation to have. But Kim Johnson touches on it and gives us that new and interesting perspective. So as you can see, from as much as I've just rambled on about this book, I absolutely enjoyed it. I thought it was well done. I listened to it on audio. I cannot wait to get a physical copy of this book so I can reread it and annotate it, because it definitely will be a favorite of 2020 for me. I gave it 5 stars. If you haven't thought about picking it up, if you haven't heard of it, I really implore you to check this book out. All right, y'all. So as you can tell, I didn't read as much in the second half of July because the books got bigger in the second half of July, and the books got a little bit more complex in the second half of July. But I thought that this overall was a great reading month. Like I said, I'm glad that I was able to successfully get bingo in 3 different readathons. That makes me feel great. I'm glad that I was able to read so much towards the Mermaid Project. I'm really excited to see what August is going to bring us. Let me know in the comments what your favorite book of July was, or if you have a couple that were favorites, or let me know what was the worst book that you read in July. As always, I look forward to hearing from y'all. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button. If you're interested in following me on social media, or if you're looking for ways to support my channel, all the links will be down in the description box below. I hope you guys have a wonderful evening, and I'll be back with another video soon.